Well, hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Diane Okonski, the host for this evening's program. Before we get started, I just want to say thank you to our members and our donors. You are what makes our webinars, classes, scholarships, and grants possible. If you are not yet a member of INL US, please consider joining us. Information can be found on our website, www.inlus.org. We encourage you today to submit your questions using Zoom's Q&A feature, and Anne Marie will answer as many as possible throughout her program. Today's program is also being recorded and will be available on the INL US website and on our YouTube channel. So let me introduce Anne Marie. Joining us from Kelowna, British Columbia, is author Anne Marie Wells. She is a pushcart and Best of the Net nominated poet, as well as a playwright, memoirist, and oral storyteller. She is the founder of the Joy of Poeting, and Starbelt Press, through which she has published her book of writing prompts. Write some cool shit, before publishing Happy Iceland. She also traditionally published two collections of poetry, Survived by a memoir in verse and other poems in 2023, and Mother, which won the 2023 Cinnamon Press Chapbook Contest and debuted in 2024. She also authored two children's books, and I'm not even going to try and say this in Spanish. So in English, it is Mommy, Why Am I a Bird? In 2015, and Underwater Explorers and Research Rescuers in 2025. Anne Marie is a certified listener, poet through the Good Listening Project, and earned a certificate in social emotional arts through the Arts and Healing Initiative. She is the content and copy editor for Mama's Kitchen Press and works as a freelance copy editor, ghostwriter, writing coach, and creative writing instruction. Whew. When she's not writing, Anne Marie enjoys reading, long walks with her family, and completing the New York Times crossword puzzle and jazzercise. So welcome, Anne Marie, and congratulations on your latest book. And thank you for joining us this evening. I'm going to just turn the mic over to you.
Thank you so much, Diane. And thank you, Doug and Diane, for organizing this. Thank you, INLUS, for hosting me today. So I'm going to share a little bit about the journey to getting Happy Iceland published. It's a travel memoir, the premise of which is that when I was on the precipice of turning 30, now going on 10 years ago, I followed my dream to travel Iceland, but instead of following an itinerary or renting a car and staying in hostels and hotels, I asked a random Icelandic stranger about his happiest memories and then hitchhiked and backpacked to go find where his happy memory took place. From there, I interviewed other random strangers, and following their stories, I went to go find where those happy places took place. So 10 years ago, 2016, I did not travel, unfortunately, with a high definition camera. So all the pictures that I took were with my iPhone 4, which was pretty primitive technology at the time even, but now just seems ancient. So all of the low quality photos are because they were taken with my iPhone 4 at the time. So Diane introduced me. These are my books, but I have to then put Happy Iceland is my newest one coming out later this month at the end of the month. This is my 10-year journey to publishing Happy Iceland, but let's start at the beginning. First, I had to go there. I saved for 3 years in order to take this trip. I had backpacked on the National Scenic Trail from the Everglades in Florida to the Panhandle, And so had some wherewithal for Spartan conditions and backpacking, camping, stealth camping, which is secretly camping and not using a tent. I slept under a tarp with my sleeping bag and sleeping pad most nights, and then occasionally was taken in by the kindness of strangers. Here are some of my stories, and I'll read excerpts from my book at the end. I had a lot of interesting adventures. As I was hitchhiking, I was picked up by a Danish news crew, and also the truck that's in the center here on the top, that's a milkman who picked me up along his route, and I went along on his route in the morning. On the bottom here is a French family who picked me up. I'll be reading an excerpt about them later on. In the bottom right-hand corner, you can see my setup behind me. My tarp, I would pitch like a tent using my trekking pole, but it was not very warm. And under my rain jacket here, you can see I'm wearing a lapa pesa, and that was gifted to me toward the end of my journey there. So between 2016, or after I left Iceland in 2016, I had to learn how to write. I didn't know how to write a book. I had a plethora of notes in my notebook, but I thought that if I wrote them all out and spiffed them up a bit, that literary agents would just gobble them up and want to publish this thing. But that's apparently not how the literary world works. So from 2016 to 2018, I read every book about writing. I attended writing workshops. I started volunteering for a literary organization so I could attend their workshops and their yearly writers conference for free. And I started playwriting and won my first playwriting competition in 2018. That's me in the center stage there, starring in the play that I wrote that won the competition that year. Here's bigger pictures. So my play Love and Radio and Zombies, kind of. And this was a formative experience because it encouraged me and allowed me to see that success was within reach, and that if only I had the right skills and the drive to do so, that I could push forward. The following year, in 2019, I also had a milestone experience. So 2019, at this point, I'd been working on Happy Iceland for 3 years. I had sent it out to literally 100 literary agents who all said no. One person at the 2018 literary conference or writers conference suggested that I get a writing coach, and I did. But her edits were so out of my knowledge base, I didn't know what to do with them. So when she would highlight text in my manuscript and say things like, I want to see more of you in here, I had no idea how to show more of me in there. When she would highlight text and say, show, don't tell, I had no idea what that meant. And so I didn't know how to move forward. And I put my book away for over 6 months, feeling completely overwhelmed. Well, in this picture here, you can see me. There I am in the corner there. I'm in a nonfiction writing workshop with one of my favorite authors, Florence Williams, who's right there. And at the beginning of the workshop, she had us all go around in the circle and just say why we were in the workshop. I said how I was working on this book, Happy Iceland, the premise of it, how literary agents were saying no to it, and I didn't know how to move forward. Well, at the end of this workshop, one of the women in this circle, and I was trying to remember which one, and she might be cut over on this side because none of them really looked familiar to me, or maybe one of the backs of these heads here. She was a stranger. I didn't know this woman. She came up to me after the workshop, and she said, I was just in Iceland, and you have no idea how many people asked me if I knew the American woman who went around asking people about their happiest memories. And I kept telling people, I live in a country with over 300 million people in it. No, I don't know this woman. And now, 2 weeks later, I'm in the same room as you. Well, I just broke down crying. I mean, ugly, sobbing, weeping, thinking they still remember me. They still remember this story. I have to keep going. I have to keep trying for them. Unfortunately, a few months after that, I started working on Happy Iceland again. But a few months after that, my father was diagnosed with terminal cancer. You can see a before and after picture of my dad and how pleasantly plump he was and how much weight he had lost. And so everything about Happy Iceland went on the back burner. I wasn't even thinking about it. I was only thinking about my dad. And after he passed away, I shifted my focus from writing Happy Iceland, improving my writing, to writing poetry. And I quit my job. I resigned from the job that I had. I went back to school, went back to community college. Now we're entering into the pandemic. Everything is now online. I was living in rural Wyoming without many opportunities, but now suddenly everything was online. I could go back to school and take classes remotely. I also joined the Community Literature Initiative, which is based in Los Angeles, but then during the pandemic went remote. And I learned how to not only improve my poetry writing, but publish a poetry collection. And I put together, I'm jumping ahead. I put together my poetry collection, Survived By. And then I was working on shopping my poetry collection out. Well, in 2022, so now 2 years later, I saw an advertisement for a travel book award. And on a whim, I opened up Happy Iceland on my Google Drive, went through and used all the skills that I learned in my poetry about descriptive writing and imagery. And I went through and improved Happy Iceland once more, submitted it to the contest, and lo and behold, I won. A few days after I learned that I had won, which included a book contract, Survived By also got a book contract. It was a really good time for me in 2022. Survived By was published the following year in 2023, but I ended up forfeiting my win with the writing contest because I didn't like the way that the publisher was going to publish the book. Essentially, they were going to self-publish my book on Amazon, but then split the royalties with me. And I knew that that was incorrect. I knew enough about the literary world. I had been working in that that literary arts nonprofit in Wyoming long enough to know that that would be me being bamboozled. And so the publisher and I parted ways. So I had this super high of like, yes, I won this competition. And then as it was kind of like that Wizard of Oz moment of like, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. And I was disillusioned and disappointed. However, it still emboldened me to keep moving forward. I kept at it. I went through my book again. I published another poetry collection, Mother, comma, Verb, which won the chapbook contest with Cinnamon Press. And that year as well, I had my first baby, my only baby. So again, Happy Iceland was getting pushed to the side. I wasn't thinking about it. I was a new mom, but every year with the Association of Writers and Writing Programs, AWP, as it's more commonly known, I would apply for their writer to writer mentorship program. I applied in 2023 and 2022 and did not get accepted. But then in 2024, I did, and with Happy Iceland. And my mentor, Laura Carney, became one of my closest, dearest friends to this day. So she is also a writer. She published the acclaimed memoir, My Father's List. She's holding her father's list in her hand in this picture. The premise of her book is that 10 years after her father passed away in a car accident, she found her father's bucket list and she went on a quest to complete it for him. And she wrote about it. She was a journalist, she had an MFA, and so she had a background in writing already. And she wrote this book that has won awards and was featured on the Drew Barrymore show, and New York Times covered it and everything. A lot of acclaim to this book. So I was very thrilled when Laura Carney selected my manuscript, Happy Iceland, for the writer to writer mentorship program. I was beyond thrilled. I thought, okay, this is my moment to get my foot into the door. And I will never forget my first meeting with her. She had read my book and she told me I absolutely loved it. I was so thrilled because she was my target audience, a woman who travels, solo travels sometimes, who wants to find inspiration and focus on joy and delight. And she loved my book. That was so validating. And during the mentorship program, she helped me to flesh out the epilogue. At this point in 2024, 8 years had gone by, but my epilogue only focused on 2 weeks after I left Iceland in 2026 or in 2016. So at this point, I had just had a baby. I found my forever love. None of that was in the book. And she said it needs to be. So the major thing that she helped me with, she did go through the whole book and give me suggestions that were very, very helpful, and the changes that I made. But the epilogue is the way it is now because of Laura. If and when you read the book and you read the epilogue, you can say, thank you, Laura Carney, for this tying up of some loose ends and just letting us know, where she is now type of thing. And Laura believed in my book so much that she hand delivered it to her literary agent for consideration. I waited 6 months to get the worst no I had ever gotten. It was the no that broke the camel's back. Because at this point, every time that I revamped Happy Iceland, I would send it out to literary agents again, to indie presses, to contests. And I was going on like 2, 3, but more like 400 no's. And I kept going because I believed in this. I had a much bigger why. And every time I received rejections, I took it as a sign to work on my book more. Every time I learned something new, I put it into the book. After I won the contest, the publisher at the time had made suggestions for improvements, which I did, and they were extremely helpful as well. And then, of course, Laura's suggestions as well. I knew that I had a good book, but everybody was saying no to it. Now, with Laura's literary agent, because she had a relationship with this person, I got a little bit more information than I did with every other literary agent. With everybody else, I would just get the form rejection. Thank you so much for sending us your work. Unfortunately, it's not right for us at this time. Best of luck placing it elsewhere type of thing. no other information. And Laura's agent said I was a beautiful writer and that I had a beautiful book, that my book was good. But because I didn't have a robust social media platform, she wouldn't be able to sell it to a publisher. And so the answer for her was no. And that was the hardest one to accept because it had nothing to do with the writing. It had nothing to do with the talent. It had nothing to do with the story itself. It didn't have anything to do with, use of passive voice or cliches or telling instead of showing or needing more of me in the manuscript. It had to do with sales. It had to do with having a platform so that there were built-in customers ready to buy your book before it's even on the shelves. I didn't have 10,000 followers. I still don't. I don't have a million. I have like 1,000. But even at the time that this happened, it was more like 600 or something. So I didn't have built-in buyers. And that is what many publishers are looking for, particularly with memoir that's not written by a celebrity. Who's going to care about this story? It's, they want to sell copies, and I couldn't guarantee that copies would be sold. And after hearing that, that is when I said, okay, F this. I'm going to do it myself. And that is when Starbelt Press was born. Starbelt Press is an homage to my son. His name is Orion, like the constellation. And I thought about having 3 stars in the logo, but then it's like, I don't want to have 3-star books. I want to have 5-star books. So the logo has 5 stars in it instead of 3. And I did a little tester with Starbelt Press, and that was my writing prompt book. This allowed me to work out the kinks, to see the behind the scenes with Ingram Spark, having to create a book cover and layout design and go through all of the hullabaloo behind the scenes before the big one came out, the one that is the most important, the one that I'm holding in my hands today. So that's a little bit about the journey from A to Z. It took a long time. It took a lot of drafts. I tell people that I've read this book 472 times. It might even be more than that. The number of iterations that this book saw, from simply transcribing my notes onto my computer to what I consider my work of art, my chef d'oeuvre. I I am so glad that I got so many no's, because if I didn't get those no's, I wouldn't have had a book that I'm truly, truly proud of. I know that this book is high quality writing. I know that the 10 years that I have put into learning how to become a writer have gone into this book, and I know that it shows now. So now that I took you through a little bit of a timeline, okay, I'm doing great on time, okay. I'm going to read some excerpts. The 3 excerpts that I have chosen are different scenarios of interacting with people in Iceland. So I give you a little taste of different kinds of interactions that I had. So as I mentioned, the premise of the story is that I went to Iceland without an itinerary, without any kind of real plan. And my plan started with asking a random Icelandic worker at the airport about his happiest memories. And so that's where we're going to start. Okay. I'm so excited. This is my first time reading the book out loud to anybody. So thank you for being my audience today.
Anne Marie,
Yes,
would you like to stop sharing your slides so we can see you?
sure. Happy to. Okay. In my right, tourists made their way into taxis one at a time, as if on a conveyor belt. Straight ahead, those tourist-filled taxis filed down the black serpentine road toward Reykjavik like a caravan, as if all those tourists were really traveling together en masse. To my left, two airline workers, a man and a woman in their mid to late 20s, sat together smoking under a glass shelter. Perhaps feeling my eyes on them, they both glanced over at me and then immediately looked away. Maybe this was a stupid idea. I couldn't just ask strangers about their happiest memories. First of all, they wouldn't talk to me, let alone let me into their personal lives. I'd embarrass myself. Maybe I should hike around Iceland on my own, finding whatever I'd find. I'd still have fun. But my feet were already walking in the direction of the uniformed pair. As I approached, their expressions evolved from the faces of two people making small talk into stony grimaces, my every step threatening to make them work on their cigarette break. The woman was beautiful. I believe women should not be valued for their appearance, yet this woman's contoured makeup and black hair slicked back into a militaristic ponytail made me wonder if she was a Hollywood starlet playing the banal role of airline worker for the summer's upcoming blockbuster. I looked like a slug by comparison, with my sleep-deprived eyes, my hiking pants that were too snug around my fleshy thighs, my shapeless purple rain jacket with a broken zipper, and my childlike braids spilling out from my gray wool beanie like frayed ropes. Wisps of smoke from the cigarette perched between her two delicate fingers floated toward her male colleague who stood behind her. Tall and handsome with pale skin and short black hair, he could have starred opposite the Hollywood starlet playing the Madonna role of airline worker if the summer's blockbuster was a vampire-themed romance. "Hi, can you help me?" I asked, masking the quiver in my throat behind a sing-songy lilt. "She can," the vampire co-star said, using his cigarette to point at his colleague before bringing it to his smirking lips. Daggers flew out of her eyes and straight at his jugular. He chuckled under his breath, a cavalier look in his eyes. She glanced up at me in silent acknowledgement. I had her unwilling attention. "I'm working on a writing project," I began, and the vampire co-star muffled his laughter behind his smirking lips. I wish I had rehearsed what I was going to say so I sounded professional, like I was on a mission assigned to me by a big newspaper or publishing house, instead of the truth. I had no idea what I was doing. "Could you tell me about a happy memory of yours that took place in Iceland?" The vampire co-star couldn't hold back any longer. A guffaw escaped the back of his throat. If he had been sipping a drink, it'd be the moment in the movie where he spat his drink out with droplets splattering through the air. I blushed. I knew this was stupid. I knew I would make myself look like an idiot, and here I was, looking like an idiot. Yet he and I both stared at the Hollywood starlet, waiting for her response. "A happy memory?" she asked, as if to make sure she had heard me correctly, or maybe buying herself more time before she answered. "It can be anything," I said, trying to sound reassuring. "It could be from yesterday or last year or your childhood. It doesn't have to be spectacular, just a time you remember feeling happy." I pulled my pocket-sized notebook out of my rain jacket and indicated with a sharp click of my pen that I was ready to write down anything she said. The vampire co-star and I watched as the Hollywood starlet lifted her cigarette to her lips, eyes gazing straight ahead as she scrolled through an invisible catalog of memories. After a few silent moments, she shook her head. "I can't think of a single thing," she said, looking at me with eyes that whispered, "Have mercy. Don't put me on the spot anymore." Not wanting to fluster her further in front of her colleague, I didn't press her for an answer. "That's okay," I said with a smile before turning my attention to the vampire co-star. "What about you?" "Yes, what about you?" the Hollywood starlet echoed, sounding relieved to be out of the spotlight. She raised an eyebrow and smirked at it as her colleague had done. "Ha!" he blurted. Then, mimicking the same method of contemplation the Hollywood starlet had employed a moment earlier, he lifted his cigarette to his lips and gazed straight ahead. The Hollywood starlet and I stared at him in silence. "Okay," he said with a deep exhale. When I was growing up, I would camp with my family on Vestmannaeyjar. Sometimes my school friends would come with us and we would play kubar. The last time I was there was 2 or 3 years ago. My friends and I had a barbecue and played drinking games. I jotted down his words, and the Hollywood starlet and vampire co star jabbed their cigarettes into the ashtray next to them. Their break was over, or so they said, and they rushed off as I finished taking notes. I had no time for follow up questions like, what the hell is Kubar? Or what are your names? Having just learned the Icelandic translation for thank you from the Introduction to Iceland video on the plane ride, I took the opportunity to practice my new language skill. I shouted, "Tak fyrir," at their backs as they strode inside the airport and waited for any indication of surprise or delight that I thanked them in their own language. Maybe they didn't hear me. But not everybody was as unwilling to chat. And sometimes people started out unwilling, but they warmed up. And this is an example of that. Okay, I'm looking at the time. My excerpts are a little bit long, but they need to be so you can get the context. I'll read this one, and if I have time for the third one, which is a little bit shorter, I'll get to it before we do questions. Okay. So at this point, I made my way to Fludir. I had just found the childhood sports fields of an auto mechanic, and now I was looking to find my next happy place and my next interviewee. From behind me, I heard the abrasive screech and slam of a door with rusty hinges opening and shutting. I jumped and spun around, feeling as if I had been caught red-handed trespassing. A tall, middle-aged woman walked toward the greenhouses. I was in greenhouses, by the way, wearing all black except for her Barbie pink glasses and neon pink Crocs festooned with large rhinestones. I waved to grab her attention. Talar thu einsku? Another expression I learned in the Introduction to Iceland video. Yes, I speak, the woman replied in a tone that told me my question annoyed her, but her good upbringing wouldn't allow her to be rude. Could you please tell me about these greenhouses? I asked, whirling as much honey into my voice as I could. Yes, 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 the woman said, nodding her head, sighing as if it was her duty to give me a tour, but why did I have to ask right then? She introduced herself as Delia and told me the greenhouses currently belonged to the families who lived in the cottages alongside them. Delia's family had been growing roses since 1956. Her father-in-law, who was now in his 80s, had started the rose business, and her husband and brother-in-law continued the tradition. Delia had gone to school for horticulture, and so she was happy to marry into the family, not only because she fell in love with her husband, but also because the family's business allowed her to garden every day. The evening here, when I look out the window and over the greenhouses, she explained, looking me in the eye, I find peace. I have 3 children. They give me joy, and I share this peace with them too. Since the subject had come up as organically as corn stalks sprouting beneath a bird feeder, I knew I had found my next interviewee. Delia, could you tell me about a time when you felt happy here in Iceland? A small half chuckle escaped her mouth. By the way she described the greenhouses, I could tell she had given the spiel dozens, if not hundreds, of times before. Of all the follow-up questions she received, this was probably the first time someone ever asked her about her happiest memories. When I was a young girl, I visited my aunt and uncle on their farm in the summertime. We sang a lot, all the time we were singing. I scribbled the details into my notebook, as she told them to me, but then she took the pen out of my hand and held out her hand for my notebook. She crossed out what I had written to rewrite the name of the farm, Miðmor, and then added Flot. She handed the notebook and pen back to me, but then took it away a second time to add Siglufjordur and Hofsós. And my uncle told me stories about elves, Delia continued. He had an old tractor. I would sit in there with him while he worked, and he would tell me stories about elves and trolls. I loved it. Delia then interrupted her own storytelling to add, there are really elves, you know. I nodded and smiled. No, really, she insisted, and she walked toward the end of the greenhouses. I followed her, and Delia pointed to a berm at the back of a large yard with flower beds and planters and chickens roaming around pecking at the ground. A city of elves lives there, she said. They protect me and my family. A chicken waddled over to Delia's feet, and the other chickens followed, clucking and bobbing their heads about. Wait here a minute, she said, and walked into a house, but not the one I met her coming out of before. She returned with a cup of Cheerios, the chickens clucking crescendoed as if cued by an invisible chicken maestro. Delia grabbed my hand and poured some Cheerios into my cupped palm. I squatted down, and the chickens left Delia's feet to bombard my fingers with gentle pecks, devouring the OT cereal with fervor. I squealed as they tickled my palm, and Delia laughed with me. When the chickens finished emptying my hand, I thanked Delia for sharing a bit of her life with me. I may have been an annoyance to her when we first met, but I don't think I was by the time we parted ways. I walked back down the stony hill, past the basketball courts and soccer fields. I held my head high, and there was an added bounce to my step. I was off to find Delia's childhood farm, Mythmore. Check my time. Okay. I have one last shorty for you. and then I'll take if there's any questions. I'll take questions. In short time, I was picked up by a man with a flatbed truck overflowing with tools and boxes of miscellaneous supplies. When I climbed in the front seat, I discovered the cab was just as full with random nuts and bolts, bungee cords, and lots of dust. The driver told me he was on his way to build a summer home with his brother. Does everyone in Iceland have a summer home they build with their bare hands? It seemed to be the case. That driver left me at a gas station where I scarfed down a Stracciatella skier before heading back on my way. A few cars passed without stopping, but then I was picked up by an Icelandic repairman and a Swiss man whose camper had 2 flat tires. The Icelandic repairman spoke zero English, but did speak the language of friendliness with his broad smile and easy laugh. He must appreciate the extra company if he was willing to pick me up while driving someone else to their broken down vehicle. The Icelandic repairman pointed to himself dramatically and said, August. I pointed to myself, mimicking his same theatrical gesture, and said, Anne Marie. He laughed and said, Yow, 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 yow. Anne Marie, the Swiss man said. I don't think I ever met an Anne Marie who wasn't Swiss. I spoke with the Swiss man in English and French, but didn't want to leave August out of the conversation. I returned August's incessant smiles with my own and said all the words I knew in Icelandic, a very small repertoire. I pointed to the terns, the flying birds, not like curves in the road. I pointed to the terns shouting their Icelandic name, Krika. When we drove around a curve in the road that outlined the fjord's beaches, I exclaimed, Vatten blau, wow, water, wow. When August would respond in Icelandic, we all laughed at not being able to understand one another. We didn't need to. Each other's company was enough. We arrived at the Swiss man's broken down camper with its 2 flat tires, and when I got out of the car, August came around to give me a hug. He opened his trunk, chuckling, and took out a small carton of chocolate milk, the kind you might put in a child's lunchbox, and put it under my arm with a pat on my shoulder. I smiled, said "Tak fyrir" to August, thanked the Swiss man in French for his pleasant company, and headed down the road. After only 20 minutes of walking, I heard a car behind me, and I stuck my thumb out. The car pulled up next to me, stopping in the middle of the road since there were no other cars in sight. The salt and pepper-haired man and woman inside smiled at me through the rolled-down passenger window. I smiled back and said, Hi, I'm headed to Norderfjordur. Hi, yes, we heard all about you, the woman said with a bright smile, holding herself out of the passenger window. She and her male companion, presumably her husband, both got out of the car and started moving their belongings in the back seat and trunk to make room for me and my backpack. You heard about me? I asked. We were driving past that camper back there, and a man stepped into the road waving his hands, the silver-haired man explained. We thought he needed help, so we stopped. When we started to get out of the car, he said in English, no, no, we don't need help. I just want to tell you that there's a very nice American girl hitchhiking that way, and you should pick her up if you're heading the same direction. Then a repairman in the middle of changing the camper's tire came over to our car and said in Icelandic, hey, hey, there's a very nice American girl hitchhiking that way, and you should pick her up if you're heading in the same direction. So we, of course, had to stop after recommendations like that, the woman added with a chuckle. And I'll stop my excerpts there in really good timing, I think. So I'll take a couple of questions if there are any. And yeah, I'm an open book, so fire away.
Those were amazing stories. Now, so somebody would tell you their happiest moment, and then you would go visit that place.
Yes, as best as I could. So I had a map, and an old-fashioned map, not GPS on my phone, old-fashioned map where you find it in the legend and then, do one of these to go find the place. And there were a couple locations that were kind of specific. So one was a small body of water by which a couple think that they conceived their eldest daughter. And that was very hard to find. So I didn't get up to the water, but I was able to see it from afar on top of a mountain. And I thought, okay, that's good enough. Like I don't need to go down and go see it firsthand. And then one of the other memories that I collected, a woman had witnessed a volcano erupt.
Mm.
And because I didn't have like the special vehicles needed and the volcano wasn't erupting anymore, I couldn't go to that exact location. So instead, she had told me about some craters that this volcano had made. And so I hiked to go find the craters that the volcano made. And I thought, okay, that's good enough too. So more or less, I tried to find the exact location, but in certain instances, it was not possible to do.
Okay, okay. Now, how did you come up with the idea of just going to ask a question and travel for, I think you said 5 weeks when we had our prep session,
That's right. I
that you
traveled
were
for 5 weeks.
traveling around. How did you come up with that idea?
Well, it's a strange story. I tell people that a ghost told me to do it because I really don't have an explanation. I'm not a planner, so I knew that I was just going to kind of wing it when I went. I knew that that was going to be the case. And then maybe a month before I was supposed to leave, I already had my tickets and everything. I knew when I was going to go and when I was going to come back. I was just laying in bed one night about to fall asleep, and it was like a ghost whispered it in my ear. And I just had this like random idea. I wasn't even thinking about like, how should I do this or something, or as far as I remember. And I got this idea that I would ask people about their happiest memories and then try to go find where those happiest memories took place. And lo and behold, I traveled really well. Like all the memories that I collected and all the people that I met, I just feel like it all happened for a reason.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so that would be very Icelandic that you heard about this from a ghost. So yeah, but I would like to remind people that if you have questions, please use the Q&A function in Zoom. It might be located at the bottom of your screen, or it might be under the little tab on the bottom of your screen that says more. So given the chance, would you do this again?
At the time, at age 30, absolutely. Absolutely. But now at age 40, when I was 35, I did have this thought like, oh, maybe when I'm 40, I'll do like a return to Iceland and Happy Iceland 2.0 or something. And maybe someday I'll do it. Maybe, when I turn 50 or 60 or some other milestone. But now I have a 2-year-old. I'm married. and I'm in school again. I'm going back to school for creative writing again. And so it's just not feasible at this time. I would love to go back to Iceland and visit all my friends and hand them hard copies of my book signed and dedicated to them. I would love to do that one of these days. I would also love to go to the Icelandic Writers Retreat in Reykjavik. That is every April. It's on the bucket list, but yeah, I actually haven't traveled outside of the country since Iceland 10 years ago, oh, besides going to Canada. But other kind of international travel, I haven't done any since leaving. So maybe
Wow.
someday, but not anytime soon, not while my baby is young.
I can understand that. I can understand that. So were you at all concerned about traveling alone, just asking questions in a country where you didn't speak the language?
Yes, people ask me that a lot, and no, I wasn't scared at all. You know how maybe you have heard of the concept of like the frontal lobe is not fully developed until you're like 25, and that's why in the United States people can't rent cars before they're 25, is because you're waiting for that frontal lobe to fully develop, and the frontal lobe is responsible for like risk assessment and impulse control. And I feel like maybe I skew that average. So, where most people, the average of fully developed frontal lobes is like 25, maybe mine was like 35. Some people is like 15, but then other people is like 35. I think I had one of those slower developed frontal lobes. And so, risk assessment, just like, I feel like I'm much more risk averse now than I was at age 30. But I also didn't have a child. I didn't have a partner that I was married to, at least. And I was much more free spirited. I definitely still struggle with impulse control. But yeah, I just think that I wasn't worried, not necessarily that I had to be, because Iceland is a very, very safe country. It wasn't my first rodeo with camping, backpacking, hitchhiking. I had done all of those things before, and I hitchhiked in Florida. So, like, Florida is way more unsafe than Iceland. And because I had traveled, I studied abroad in grad school. I went to grad school in Portuguese, so the subtitle of my bilingual book is actually Portuguese and not Spanish. Um, it's okay. It's okay. They're very similar. Iberian Peninsula. And I got myself in enough sticky situations and then out of those sticky situations that I learned to trust myself. That whatever happened, I would be able to get out of it. And there was one instance while I was there that wasn't violent, but was scary, that I didn't feel safe or comfortable. And I was able to get out of that situation. And I wrote about it in the book. So I never felt afraid. And I was thinking to myself, even that the United States is just so much more dangerous, and the risk of like mass shootings and just gun violence in general, that if I got through to age 30 in the United States, I could make my way through Iceland. that and people, my mother, my sister, they were concerned about my safety, but I made it through. And 99.9% of the people that I interacted with, both Icelandic and international, other tourists also picked me up. Everybody, 99.9% of them were kind, generous, warm, not scary or creepy at all. And I feel like that's the majority of the world too, that the majority of the world is good. And particularly with hitchhiking, it's a risk on both sides. It's a risk to get in a car with someone. It's also a risk for someone to stop and allow a stranger into the car. And I was surprised how many times strangers we were just meeting picked me up. I'm in their car and they leave their car to like go do something, and they leave me in the car. And they like totally trust that I'm not going to steal their stuff or steal their car or whatever. That, you know, and of course I wasn't going to. But they don't know that. So I feel like it's a risk on both sides that, I could be a femme fatale for all they know, but maybe the pigtail braids helped me look more less scary.
Well, I'm very happy that everything worked out fine, and I cannot wait to read the book. And it comes out on June 27th. Is
Correct. Yes,
that
June
true?
27th.
Okay. And
Mhm.
how do we order it?
Yes, it is available on bookshop.org, and that's available for, I think, only US residents or addresses in the US. And then it is available on Amazon as well. It's also available through Ingram Spark. So if you want to support your local indie bookstore, please tell them that you would love to buy my book through them, and they can order a wholesale bookstore discount rate. And it would be like the same price that you would pay on Amazon, but then you're supporting local business instead.
Okay, well, thank you. And once again, Anne Marie, thank you so much for giving us your time and sharing your experiences with you. With us. It sounds like you just had an absolutely life-changing, once in a lifetime experience, and I'm really happy you wrote it down. So,
Yes, I did. And
like
I'm
I
really
said,
glad I wrote it down too. Yeah.
yeah. And as I said, I'm thrilled that you were able to spend time with us today. But before we leave, I do want to just mention a couple of things that are on the INLUS calendar. And one is about geothermal energy. So if you've ever wanted to know about geothermal energy in Iceland and how it's used and things like that, you can join us for a webinar to learn more about it. Kari Valgeirsson from the geothermal exhibit just outside of Reykjavik will give us an overview of the basics of geothermal energy and tell us about how one small plant can supply all the electricity and hot water for the city of Reykjavik. And this is tentatively scheduled for Thursday, July 16th. We're still trying to confirm that date, but that seems to be pretty firm. Again, we will let everybody know what the final date is and more details in the future. And also, INLUS has a summer photo contest going on called Wild Iceland. For more information, you can visit our website and look at our for details. You can find those in our June 1st newsletter or on our social media sites. So thank you again very much, Anne Marie. It's been great, and congratulations on your book. And to all who are attending tonight, thank you very much for attending. Bye bye.